Welcome. Welcome to week 6 of MPAI 600 here at Georgetown University's Applied Intelligence Program. Just want to start off with announcements. Paper 2, the strategic policy paper, is due now, depending on when you are viewing this. So if you didn't brief on Thursday, you will be doing a paper that's due now. As a reminder, if you did brief, then you're flip-flopping. You're going to be doing a brief at the next Zoom session on July 5th, and your paper is going to be due on the last day of class if you're not briefing there. So to make that clear at the onset, and your papers are individual efforts. The presentations are group efforts. The papers are individual. So we had a good Zoom session this past week. I think it went well. No major technical issues. I think all the briefers did pretty well. If you it might not be a bad idea if you are briefing next to just talk to your fellow classmates and see what went wrong, what went right with their briefing, so they can give you hints on going forward. And I have no problem with you doing that to make sure your style and substance is accurate for the future briefs. The next Zoom session, again, for groups 4, 5, and 6 is July 5th. That is Thursday, July 5th, and we'll have it at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. What we'll also do is we'll have a long brief that day. So we will have all 3 briefs go, 30 minutes each for each brief. So 20 minutes for the brief, 10 minutes for question and discussion. And then we will do 30 minutes of a job talk. That is jobs in the federal government, jobs in your in the defense community, in the intelligence community, law enforcement. So if you have questions on jobs and those issues, please let me know beforehand so I can come prepared to answer those questions. And again, I think we had a lot of people who are interested in it, so please let me know again specifically what you're interested in for future job talks. And we'll be doing that again July 5th. So current events. Yeah, the border issue. I try not to. And sometimes you shy away from controversy, but for here, let's go with controversy. Let's lean in on the controversy here. I think everyone's aware of what's happened on the border and the separation of kids from their families for people coming northward. First, let me just say, yes, I agree that separating kids is inhumane, and I think the media's covered that. I think everyone's covered that in detail. That policy probably shouldn't have passed mustard. The one thing I'm going to say is, and I'm going to send out a documentary, and maybe I might even have a final question on this, is, okay, so what do we do now? How do we deal with this issue of families coming in on the border, whether coming through legal checkpoints or illegally? Do we detain them for long periods of time? I've heard one policy of, and I don't know if this is how effective or not this is, but one of the issues is people don't show up for their court date. So they come in over the border, they're arrested, and then they're let into the country, but then they don't come back for their court dates. Some people have said, okay, we can use technology like leg bracelets and arm bracelets to, okay, somebody comes in and they're tracked and we know what's going on. That might be one solution. Indefinite detention is another solution, but I think that might fall under the inhumane issue. So the one thing I ask that you think about is, okay, we all are appalled by what's happened on the border, but what's our solution here? How do we solve this problem? And it could also just be, this is such a minor issue, and it depends where you live, but in the grand scheme of things, this isn't a massive threat to the United States, and we just say we prioritize it the way we are now. It's not as highly prioritized. And one thing I'm going to do is I am going to send out, the last time we had the migration issue in 2014, 2015, from, again, Central American, particularly El Salvador countries, unaccompanied minors coming in, and we had to deal with them humanely. We couldn't just turn them away because they're going to get killed in El Salvador, and we couldn't keep them in detention indefinitely. So they came into many communities here, and it was most people agree, a vector for MS-13 to come in. Whether it was not necessarily MS-13 coming in through the border, but they were able to use the kids and intimidate the young minors coming in to join the gangs when they came into various communities. Here in Fairfax County, we do have several bodies show up in a park that's right near my house based on MS-13 violence. I'm going to send you a documentary that talks about MS-13 on Long Island as well, where I grew up. So that's what happened the last time there was a migrant crisis or child migrant crisis coming in. And you can say, and it's certainly a reasonable argument to say, yes, that's the cost of letting migrants in, that there's going to be some gang affiliations and issues, and that's just the cost of doing business. The positives, the humanitarian positives outweigh the negatives. But again, that is an issue that came up. So again, I'm going to weigh into this controversy because a lot of people are on the Homeland Security track, and the bottom line is, okay, so what's the answer? What's the solution here to deal with the border issue? And I may or may not bring that up on the final. I already have the final written, but I may not. I might want to include this as well. We'll see, but I'll send that documentary out as well. So back to our normal class. Review of week 5. Great comments, great issues on both the EU as well as the lone wolf issue. And some of the questions that need to be drawn out from this segment is, when does radicalization get monitored further? When has a person gone from a passive viewing of whether it's Islamic extremism, alt-right extremism, when have they gone from that to actual down the road of radicalization where we can monitor them, or where we should monitor them? It's a free country. I can listen to right-wing extremism or Anwar al-Awlaki videotapes from my basement of my house. So should I be monitored if I do that? Well, hundreds of thousands of people do that. You can't monitor all of them. What if I interact on a jihadi chat room and I've gone from a passive viewer to now an interactive viewer? Should I be monitored then? How about when I start trying to talk to my friends about, or other people on the internet about Islamic extremism? So now I'm no longer just an interactor with some extremist in Yemen, but now I'm the center point of trying to radicalize others. Then do I get monitored and or arrested? So when along the spectrum do we put people on watch lists? Do we give people further scrutiny? And then when do we get to the point where they're arrestable? That's the question that, again, the lone wolf issue has to answer. What do we do for people on the radar? You saw that in the EU documentary. It's not like, again, Crockett and Tubbs, for those of you who are old enough to remember that, and if you're not, go ahead and Google it, but it's not like where you can just monitor someone 24 hours. People show up on the radar. The Orlando shooter, he was on the radar. The Boston Marathon bomber, he was on the radar. The EU Backlon theater perpetrators were on the radar. So how do we solve this problem? Again, people are on the radar, but they haven't done enough to be arrested. There's that gap in between. And that's where, again, a lot of the lone wolves, a lot of other terrorist organizations operate in, is that gap. So what do we do about that? Do we have the appropriate funding structures, people? I would argue that after 9/11, we certainly have spent a lot of money on intelligence and domestic law enforcement. I think we have the funding there. I'm not sure the structures are there. I think we're bifurcated. If at the federal level we're sharing information horizontally better than we did in 9/11, I don't think we're sharing information vertically. And what I mean by that is, does a police officer, when he or she is going down the street in, say, Nashville or Minneapolis, or an area where there's a high immigrant population, Does he know that, yes, that guy that lives in that house traveled to Yemen 3 times? And there's signals intelligence that says that guy in that house is talking to a nefarious actor in Afghanistan. Does the police officer on the ground know that? I don't think so. In fact, no, he doesn't. I can tell you that right now. So we have the information at the federal level, but it's not being disseminated down on the ground across state and municipal levels. And then the other action, just like I talked about the issue, we live in a free society. You can't monitor everybody. You can't, gun purchases and gun rights are out there. You can't curtail all guns to people. Should we just accept this? That in a free society, you're going to have people that are radicalized, either Islamic extremists or alt-right extremists on that level as well. And just say it's free speech, free society, certain people are going to die. It doesn't affect your way of life. We're not talking about thousands, hundreds of thousands of people dying from lone wolves. And should we just accept it? Just like I mentioned earlier, should we just accept a little bit of illegal immigration as just the cost of a free society? I'll let you decide on that. So week 6, criminal intelligence, I shifted over to Lemieux, the program director. As many of you know, he's an expert in this field, so he'll be giving the lecture. We're going to talk about CompStat, which is not a computer program, but a series of procedures that monitored or used metrics to monitor the crime-fighting nature of police precincts and police captains. And many people, not all, in fact, a lot of people don't, well, I should say, a lot of people thought this was the result of the decline in crime from the 1970s to what we're seeing now. And despite what you might hear from certain world leaders, crime has gone down considerably over the last 20 to 30 years. And the question is why? And a lot of people say it's because of CompStat, better policing, better intelligence-driven operations for law enforcement. Others have said it is a whole confluence of effects, from demographics to a better economy. Again, that's the question to have in the back of your head as we're going through this module. And then we're going to talk about law enforcement technologies. We're going to look at the Boston Marathon. We looked at the intelligence failure last quarter or last module. This one, we're going to look at the technologies that were allowed to capture the Boston Marathon bombers. And it's the Nova documentary that's excellent, that will explain those technologies. And then the question to ask while you're watching it is, how transferable are those technologies to criminal law enforcement or throughout the country? So I look forward to your points, and if there's questions or issues, please let me know.